Hello and welcome to this Digital Camera Magazine video tutorial. Today we're going to show you how to apply depth of field to an image. Basically, if you've taken a macro shot and the subject isn't standing out quite as much as you'd like it to, you can use a trick of basically applying a Gaussian blur to the background to create that depth of field which will make your subject stand out. Now to do this we're going to use two or three tools, basically the magnetic lasso tool to select our subject and our focal plane. Then we're going to use the Gaussian blur just to blur out the background, and then we're going to use various different types of feathering and selecting just to create that smooth transition between the sharp and the blurred background. Okay, to get started we've got a picture here, two dice, several counters and the shaker. What we need to do first is just to duplicate the background. So to do this, just left click on your backgrounds layer in your layers palette and drag and drop that onto your new layer icon. Once you've done that, we have the background copy layer which will appear. Then what we want to do is go back to the image and start to take a look at what exactly we want to select from the image and what we want to have as our subject matter, where we want our focal plane, and whether any objects cross that focal plane which we're also going to have to deal with. So if we take a quick look, we want this dice in the middle to be our subject matter. We're going to have a focal plane which goes from just at the bottom of this counter to just underneath the dice here. And then if we follow that focal plane across the horizontal of the image, we'll see that it's bisected by the dice which is here in the foreground. So before we start, what we want to do is just to select those three areas, and then we can deal with two of those in one go, and the third, which is the dice in the foreground, we're going to have to take a bit of a look at right at the end. So to get started, we're going to use the magnetic lasso tool just to select the subject dice. So if you go to the tool palette on the left hand side and just click on that icon, L for the shortcut for the lasso tool, and if you keep pushing L you'll see it rotate until you have the cursor here with the magnet icon. Once you've got that, just click very close to the outer edge of the dice, just click once and then keep your mouse held down and just start to drag around the edge of the mouse, and Photoshop will very cleverly distinguish between the contrast of the subject and of the background, and it makes a pretty good selection just by dragging that tool round. Once you meet up with the beginning, release the left mouse button and you'll have made your selection. Once you've done that, just go Ctrl C and Ctrl V, and we've just pasted the dice into the background or into a new layer. So if I just turn off those two background layers, and we can see how the dice has been pretty perfectly cut out there. The next thing we have to do is decide on our focal plane, and we want that from just below the dice here to probably the bottom of the counter, and the quickest and easiest way to do this is just to select the marquee tool. So if we select back onto the background copy, just roughly estimate just below the dice there, drag off to the left of the screen, and then left mouse click and drag the marquee tool back over the image. By moving the mouse up and down you can adjust the size of the marquee selection, and we want just the bottom of the counter there, and so if we just release the mouse now, and we've made our horizontal focal plane selection. Again, if we go Ctrl C and Ctrl V, and again turn off the background layers, and you can see where our focal plane is going to be. Okay, turn the background layer on again, and now we want to click back onto the background copy. So we've got the full image selected, again onto the magnetic lasso tool, and what we're going to do is just make a selection around the dice which is going to be in the foreground of our image. So magnetic lasso tool, exactly the same as we did with the last dice, and we're going to just quickly run that around until we've selected it. Wait for the little circle which will appear when you see the two ends of your selection meet. Go Ctrl C and Ctrl V, and we're going to drag that all the way up to the very top layer. It's in the foreground, and so when we apply an effect to that, we want it to be on top of the other layers. Okay, if we take a look at what we have now, we've now got our focal plane, we've got our subject matter, and we've got the one object which was crossing over on our subject matter, and that's going to basically have a different focal point to our area of selection. So if we just turn layer 3 off, which is our foreground dice, and click back onto layer 1 and go Control E or Apple E just to merge that with our focal plane layer, and then go over to the left hand palette, the tool palette, and select our magic wand. Shortcut for that is W. If we left click once, we can select the top area of the screen, and then we can either hold down Shift and click in the bottom to add to the selection, or if you go up to the toolbar at the top, which is the magic wand toolbar, and just click the add to selection icon, which is the second one along, you don't have to hold down Shift, and you can click again, and that will add that to the selection. What we want to do now is just to create a gradient between our areas that are in focus and the areas that we're going to blur. So we're going to go up to Select and Modify, and then we're going to contract our selection because it's got the two areas above and below the dice. And we're going to contract that by, let's go for 10 and click OK. And you should see the selection just move away from our dice. The next thing we want to do is just to add a feather to the selection. That'll help just create a gradient in between our areas that we're applying a filter and the areas that the filter is not being applied to. So if we go back to Select and down to Feather, and we've picked a feather of 15 and click OK, you won't see really any difference to your selection, but when you start to apply effects to it, you'll see how it blends the applied layer into the original layer. So once we've got that, just click back onto the background copy layer, make that visible, and then we're going to hide the ant so we can see what is going on. So to do this, we go Control H or Apple H if you're on a Mac. And then we're going to start to apply a Gaussian blur to that background copy layer. So make sure you've got it selected in the Layers palette on the right hand side. Go up to Filter and Blur, and we're looking for the Gaussian blur, which is the fourth option down. Click that once and you'll see the preview window appear. Just move it up to the right hand side and make sure that you've got the preview radio button clicked so you can see the effect that adjusting the radius is having on your image. And then if we just move the slider up and down, we can see how the Gaussian blur is just being applied to the image. If we take that right up to about 16, and we can see how that has really just kicked out the background. The counters in the background are all out of focus. The foreground is slightly out of focus, but we've got our focal plane running across the center of the or the bottom third of the image, and we have our subject matter, our dice, which is perfectly in focus. As you can see, as pointed out before, our dice in the foreground here is crossing the focal plane. So we've got the top and bottom which are out of focus, but the middle bit here is in focus. So once you're happy with the amount that blur has been applied, just click OK. That'll apply that to the image. And now what we need to do is to go back to our layer 3, which was our foreground dice that we extracted earlier. Just switch that back on. Okay, here we can see that the foreground dice has reappeared and it's all nicely in focus. Do remember that you have your selection, or you still have your selection. So if we go Control H, we'll see the selection appear, then Control D, and we've just removed that selection. Now what we want to do is just to apply the same filter, Gaussian blur filter, to the dice in the foreground as we did for the background. Now we can either do as we did before and go up to Filter, Blur and Gaussian blur, but if you have a look at the top, you'll notice that the Gaussian blur is now the top selection, so you can click that and that'll apply that blur directly to the dice. Shortcut for that is Control F or Apple F on a Mac. So with that applied, we can have a quick look, check that we're happy with our depth of field there. And we're now going to flatten those top 3 layers down. So if we make sure we've got the top layer, layer 3 selected, hold down Shift, click on the background copy layer, and then go Control or Apple E, and that'll merge just those 3 layers together. If we now switch on our background layer and just click on and off the top layer 3, and we can see how that has adjusted the depth of field, and now that draws your focus directly into the subject matter, which is the dice in the center of the screen.